tried asking something in the mental health department, we hope I'm somewhere along the lines. Today is very special for me because I have a very special host that's really going to be hosting this program, and that is Dr. Abraham Twerski, MD, which I would say is the pioneer of mental health in the frum world and everything that he's done. I would say I'm probably in this field only because of you and everything that you've put at this level. So I have a huge hakar satoiv, and it's an honor to be here. When I asked you to please join, I never dreamed that there's a chance that you would just say yes so easily and just be so eager to come. So we have over here Dr. Abraham Twerski, which will be taking your questions, and maybe I'll put in my little 2 cents somewhere. But it's really to give him the floor and for each of us to appreciate what he's done. Dr. Twerski, of course, has just written his book, The Rabbi and the Nuns, which we'll hear about his extensive knowledge and expertise with addictions and how he's even started the 12th step in the frum world. And of course, we're going to continue with our normal system where you call in, ask your questions, and in this case, we're going to have Dr. Twerski answer them, take them. And for those of you tuning in now, the number to call in to ask your question is 718-683-5858. That's 718-683-5858. As well as you can watch us live on the Lakewood Scoop and on Yeshiva World. So we're looking forward to taking your questions. Dr. Twerski is looking forward to taking your questions. He's here with us live in the studio. This is not just called in, phoned in from somewhere, so you can see him live, watch us live on the Lakewood Scoop, Yeshiva World, and of course on the jrootradio.com. And always to start with an appreciation for the JRoot Radio for having this program, for hosting us. Great appreciation to that. And as well as for our wonderful technician, Aaron, which just to go see what it looks like over here with a professional background that goes on to take him for your Simchas weddings. The number to call him for him to do your production is 347-370-9083. 347-370-9083. So Dr. Twerski, really, to turn over the floor to you. Just one more time to plug the number. We've already got people calling in, 718-683-5858, 718-683-5858. Just to get a little information, just a little about you. When you started therapy many years ago as an MD, did you ever think the frum world would come to accept therapy?
Well, it was difficult. You see, what happened was that in the early days of modern psychiatry, the theory about all kinds of mental illnesses was based on the psychology of Sigmund Freud. Now, Sigmund Freud was Jewish, but a non-believer. And not only was he a non-believer, but he was anti-religion. And he believed that religion is some kind of neurosis and that people have to be cured from religion. Well, this meant that if a frum person went to a psychiatrist who followed Freud's theory, there's a chance that he would attack his religious belief and tell him that it's a neurosis and then he should drop this belief. So that gave psychiatry a very bad name in the frum world, and it took time for that to dissipate and to realize that now we have so many frum therapists. Several weeks from now, there's going to be a Shabbaton, a convention of the Nefesh group, with more than 300 frum psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, and so it's a totally different world now.
Yes. Let's just talk about some of the taboos that might be happening that people might say that doesn't exist. For an example, I've just now in Lakewood, I actually live in Lakewood, and I volunteer for one of the organizations that they have now group. It's Yad B'Yad, and it's groups for men. And group therapy is something that's starting to get very popular, and I see the benefits to that. I know the 12th step is sort of a group-based process. Can you explain what is that? Is it the first step is like, handing over the belief in Hashem that we're powerless?
Yeah, well, first of all, there's a little bit of difference, even though the 12-step program, like Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, even though it is a group, it's different than group therapy. Group therapy is usually in small groups of perhaps anywhere from 6 to 8 people with a group therapist and dealing with individual problems. The 12-step program can be anywhere from the 20 people to 80 people to 200 people coming in the same room, usually with a speaker who shares his or her experience in addiction and the recovery. And then there's some discussion of it. So it's a little different than group therapy. Now, the 12-step program, it's true that its origin began with a Christian group. However, I can never understand how the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill Wilson, how he ever got so many ideas that the only place he could have found them is in our Musars Forum. And I wrote a book many years ago called Self-Improvement, I'm Jewish, in which I pointed out that if I had to design a program for recovery from addiction, it would end up being word for word the 12 steps.
Wow.
Now, for example, the first step is I recognized that I'm powerless over whatever the addiction is, alcohol or drugs or food, and that only a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. That is word for word the Talmud, where the Talmud says that a person's Yetzer Hara, a person's evil instinct, is so powerful that a person could never withstand it if not that Hashem was helping him do it. So, just like the alcoholic is powerless over the alcohol without the help of Hashem, we are powerless over our Yetzer Hara without the help of Hashem. And we daven every day for Hashem to help us combat the temptations of the Yetzer Hara.
Wow. Along a different line, and then we're going to take several callers that we see already starting to line up. The number to call and to ask your question of Dr. Twerski, and along the mental health field is 718-683-5858, 718-683-5858, as well as we'll be reading several questions that are on from the Lakewood Scoop that people have already asked. Self-esteem. I know you've got several books on self-esteem, how to build a person's self-esteem, to recognize them. Can we clarify what's the importance of self-esteem?
The importance of self-esteem, first we need to define what self-esteem is. Self-esteem really means having an accurate, true concept of oneself. Right? And the reason that's so important is because myself is my reality. If I have a misperception of reality, I'm not going to be able to make a good adjustment to life. Right? And if I have a misperception of myself, that's a misperception of reality. Now, I'm here to tell you that most people have a misperception of themselves because they feel themselves to be inferior and inadequate or unlikable, negative about themselves. Now you will say, well, that's not so. I know a person and he doesn't have any low self-esteem. He thinks he's always boasting he's the greatest. Well, listen to what Rabbi Yonah said 900 years ago. Rabbi Yonah said that a Baal Gaiva, a person who is arrogant and vain and thinks he's the top of the world, is actually a person with self-esteem who is trying to escape his feelings of worthlessness by thinking himself to be superior to others. Right? So a Baal Gaiva is really a person with low self-esteem. So if we have a mistaken conception of ourselves, what difference does it make whether the mistaken conception is that the person thinks that he's a multi-billionaire when he doesn't have 2 cents to rub together? Right? Whether the person thinks he's Mashiach, or whether the person thinks he's Emperor of China, those are all delusions. Now, if a person who is bright, intelligent, resourceful, attractive, if he thinks himself to be dull and unattractive and unlikable, he's delusional. It's just that he has a negative delusion instead of having this grandiose delusion. And people who have low self-esteem eventually get into some kind of problem. And the reason that I am so familiar with it is because that was my problem for 38 years. I was 38 years old when I discovered there's something wrong with the way I feel about myself. And since then, I've been working on developing my self-esteem. And so for the past 45 years, I've worked on it.
So I got to ask you, what was something you had a low self-esteem about?
It's not a question about. It's a question that, for some strange reason, I feel negative about myself. And again, this is what the Talmud says. The Talmud says that a person's Yetzer Hara grows stronger every day and tries to destroy him. How does the Yetzer Hara try to destroy a person? It makes him feel inadequate, inferior, worthless. Now, I had everything going for me. I had beautiful parents. I excelled at everything that I did. I graduated high school at 16. I got smicha at 21. I became a doctor. I became a psychiatrist. And all of my performances and all of my successes did not change the way I felt about myself. So I needed to get approval from the whole world. If there were 5 billion people in the world, I needed 5 billion people to approve of me.
Wow.
And I did things, crazy things, to get approval from others. I became the world's greatest people pleaser. And that was ridiculous. Right? I was so sensitive to criticism that if somebody just looked the wrong way at me, I'd become depressed. Right? Nobody likes to have failures. Failures are very unpleasant. But failures are part of normal life. Right? And if a person has a failure, it doesn't destroy him. But the way I was feeling, I couldn't tolerate the possibility of having a failure. It would crush me. So I had to do all kinds of things to be perfect. And perfectionism drains your abilities. So low self-esteem is a delusion, and it can cause people to have many maladjustments in life.
So when I tell people on air that I go for therapy, about 2 hours session therapy is about once every 2 weeks, and it's not always about case management or reviewing case review with other therapists. It's even about me, myself, and my inner growth. So he's saying there's nothing really wrong with me. If my wife's listening, to tell her there's not, she's trying to figure out why am I still doing it if I'm like where I am in the field. So you're saying you're working on this 40-something years on it.
Yeah, my self-esteem now is better than it was ever before, right? But I still got a ways to go.
All right, let's go ahead and take some questions. We're going to go to line 1. We have Miriam on the air. You're on with Rabbi Dr. Twerski. And I guess Mordechai Weinberger as well.
Hello?
Yes.
Hi.
Hold on. I'm just going to raise the volume. Just give me 1 second. Okay. Just talk again.
Hello. I have a 13-year-old son who's very limited in his food choices. He'll only eat pizza, pasta, eggs, and bread. And I was wondering if there's a psychological component to this aversion.
Aaron, could we just have someone over here? We got to raise the volume in our room. Please. Yeah, it's too low. Thank you. Sorry, you'll just repeat it in a moment. We're just in our room. Hearing the volume is a little, we'll get it. Again, for those of you tuning in now, we have the honor. It's your host, your weekly host, Mordechai Weinberger, LCSW. We have the honor of having Rabbi Dr. Twerski. And to ask your question, to call in, the number is 718-683-5858. 718. There it is. Yes. 683-5858. So go ahead, Miriam, and please ask your question again.
Hello, yes. I have a 13-year-old son who is very limited in his food choices. He only likes pizza, pasta, eggs, bread, and cheese. And I was wondering if there's a psychological component to his aversion.
Well, the problem that you have is that I'm not an expert on nutrition in any means, but it's quite obvious that with the kinds of things that he is eating can give him excessive weight, and obesity is certainly a problem that you want to avoid.
That's not the issue. I was wondering if I should approach it, instead of just leaving him alone, if I should approach it like more in a psychological way instead of just leaving him. Not worried about the nutrition. He's getting supplements and he's fine health-wise.
Right. Again, I'm not an expert on the subject, but let me suggest something to you. There is a fine book that came out about a year or two ago on eating habits, and it's based primarily on the Rambam, based on Maimonides, and it was written by David Zulberg, Z-U-L-B-E-R-G. I think it can be a very helpful guide, because the Rambam was certainly foremost in medicine as well as in halacha and philosophy. And I think that I can't give you the answers to how to approach it psychologically, because I never dealt with nutritional issues, but I would suggest that you read that book.
Read the book. Okay, thank you very much.
Can I take a jab at it as well?
Sure, yes. Please.
How old is your son?
13.
13. Is it always going on, or it's
It's
just?
since he's a little boy, believe it or not, since he's like maybe a year.
And is he a kid that if you discuss things with him, that he understands what's happening? Or?
Yes, he understands.
So it's just in one area.
Just in food.
And is the issue that he says, let's say it's a sensory issue that he likes the taste, or he doesn't like the taste of other foods?
He won't even touch it. He tried in the summer. I bribed him. I said, if I'll give you $30 if you eat a chicken cutlet.
Yeah.
And he tried. He really did. He wanted to, but he couldn't do it.
And in all other areas, he's okay? You're not seeing signs anywhere else?
No.
Wow. Okay, well, happens to be I have seen several people that have, or kids, let's say, that have had this issue, and even adults that have had it. And many times it's just their sensories, just a like or a preference, and it's a taste in one area.
And you just leave it alone?
Well, let's put it this way. I like sort of when someone asks me, when is it a sign? When does someone have a problem? And it's one out of two things. Number one is if it affects your life or it affects others' lives. If he's eating nutritionally, he's taking care of himself, he's successful, he's not having signs of other areas where he's not stable and not balanced, well, then in that case, so what? Everyone's got a little mishigas. I got mine. I'm sure you might have yours.
Thank you very much. I appreciate very much talking to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good.
Have a great day.
Excellent. We are going to go to Sarah. Sarah on line 2. And again, for those of you tuning in now, we have the great honor of having Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twerski, MD, with us in the studio, which will be taking your questions. To ask your questions, anything along the mental health or mental field, the number is 718-683-5858. That's 718-683-5858. Sarah on line 2, you're on the air with Dr. Abraham Twerski.
Hello, am I on the air?
Yes, you are.
Okay, I have two questions. Question number one. I am an Orthodox Jewish member of Al-Anon here in Brooklyn for the past 20 years. And I found a phenomenon, and I've been dealing it very limited, but I'd like a little more guidance, please. And the phenomenon is the following. As a general rule, the Rosh Yeshiva Rabbanim in Brooklyn have gotten much more sensitive and bakant in the issue of addictions. But for some reason or another, the addict has a personal love, a personal manhig, who for whatever reason doesn't see the problem. I'd like to know, that's the first question is, I'd like to know, how does one approach the derech kavod to somebody who stands head and shoulders above me in Torah v'Yiras Shamayim, and discussing and trying to make them aware of the problem. The second question I have is the following, which is more of a problem. We are starting to experience a severe shortage of places, of Al-Anon locations, of Al-Anon meeting rooms. Usually in the past they've been in churches, sometimes hospitals. The hospitals are closing, and even the churches are pulling in their meeting rooms. And I have tried mightily, and I've been in Al-Anon for 20 years, to try to get it in shuls. And I'm literally in shuls, mental health centers, and I am having a yeoman's time. I think one hospital in Brooklyn is willing to have an Al-Anon meeting. Is there any way to sensitize Rabbanim into trying to open up spaces, storefronts, basements in their shul, somewhere where they're willing to have Al-Anon meetings?
Well, Sarah, if you succeed at doing that, you'll please let me know how it's done. Because this is something that I've been fighting with for the past 40 years. Not necessarily Al-Anon, but Alcoholics Anonymous, where shuls have not wanted to take the program in. And a very interesting phenomenon, though, is that in some shuls where we did convince the shul to take in the AA meeting, the strange thing was happened that only non-Jews came to the meeting, and the Jews went to the churches. And I think that one of the reasons was that they were afraid of being identified. Now, there is this problem in the Jewish community about you have to keep problems secret. Why? Because if you have children that have to do shidduchim, and anybody discovers that there's any kind of problem in the family, that may harm the chances of doing a good shidduch. So therefore, they try to conceal the problem. And maybe that's why it hasn't been successful to get them into shuls. I wish I knew the answer. We're still trying to do it to convince Rabbonim and the board of directors that, and I think because of the increasing popularity of treatment of addiction, I think that there'll be some better success. Now, your first question, I think that I can see how difficult it would be for you to approach a person who is a Talmud Chacham and tell him that he doesn't realize what's coming off. But I think we have to understand that people are still looking at addiction as though it is some kind of moral failure rather than a disease. But knowing that it is a disease, I think we have to approach people with the idea, look, if it was an infection, if it was an autoimmune disease, you understand that all your wisdom notwithstanding, that this is something that you're not familiar with and that you ought to become familiar with it. But I don't think that you can do it, but I think that you can find another person who is sensitive to the ideas of addiction to meet with this particular manhig and clarify them. I have seen situations where some very excellent people were misinformed, for example, about what the 12-step program was, and because of the wrong information, they said you're not allowed to go to the 12-step meeting. But once the information was clarified for them, they said, yeah, sure, of course, it's permissible.
Okay.
Can I also shift to me a drop?
Sure.
Okay. I first would like to mention one or two Rabbanim, and especially Dr. Twerski has mentioned about Nefesh. I will tell you that being that we have Kanai Nahara, over 300 from therapists now joined, and there's a whole group, they also have questions who they speak to their Rabbanim. And Rabbanim are getting educated. So, for an example, Reb David Cohen in Flatbush, you said you're in Brooklyn, is the Rav who these mental health shilas are asked, and undeniably, he's like the Rav that's informed, that knows about this and can even speak to other Rabbanim that they don't know. So I would recommend that you reach out to, let's say, to some of the from therapists and who are the Rabbanim that they contact. And I know within the Chassidish world, which I have a lot of contacts, going all the way from, I'm not going to mention names, but across the board, I've got contacts to different Rabbanim and to the Rebbes themselves, where you're able to speak to them and speak to their Dayanim. So it's opening up, mental health is opening up by leaps and bounds all over. So let's just tell you, you're doing it for so many years, but I would say in the last 5 years, there's been such a huge shift for the positive in the Frum world, that I would sort of ask you, reach out. Find out who's a Rav or someone that you speak to, or even just speak to a therapist. Who's some Rav that they speak to? And again, I'm speaking to, I think, one of the greatest Rabbanim that have information and knowledge about this is Dr. Twerski. Yeah, and, you know, that's definitely the way to go. I would also like to just mention a separate subject. I have a very close and dear friend, someone that I like to consider a dear friend, and his name is Rabbi Dr. Ben-Sion Twerski. And that happens to be Dr. Twerski's son. What a special, amazing person that also has extensive knowledge, extensive connections to Rabbanim all over. He's a noted speaker, therapist, I mean, everything that you can imagine. I would sort of say, Ilan, you, Baruch Hashem, got your bracha there. May he continue, continue doing his work. So again, I would tell you, really contact the top therapists out there, and they all have contacts to Rabbanim, which can help you.
Yes, I had a meeting earlier this year with a number of Rabbonim in Williamsburg from the Hasidic communities, and they're open to the ideas of mental health and addiction, right?
I know in Lakewood there are groups going on. I know in Brooklyn, when you said hospitals, I know Maimonides has got an Al-Anon, definitely has several AA groups going on. And I know the hospitals are having that, and I know the centers are having it. So really, we just need to get the group together. And I'll offer you, I'll even help you out. Get the group together, I will find you the place. I will give you, I usually don't like giving my office number because this is not meant to promote business for me. This is really just to help out. So I'll give you my phone line, which is a free phone line over there. There's a number how to contact me, to text me. And if you have the Al-Anon group, I will help you, Bli Neder, find a place. Within 2 weeks, you'll have the shul or the place that you would like. Debating if we should say it, but you know what, since I have you over here, we'll go on air and I'll share that. Once in my life, I went into a church, and it was actually the back of a church. And what happened was one of my clients moved to Florida and had a very heavy gambling addiction. And he joined an AA group. Really, it should have been a GA for gambling, but he joined an AA group, and he was sober for 6 months. And I was actually that time with my wife, and he tells me, please come to the group. And I usually try not even to walk by the street of the church on that side, and here you want me to go in. And it was a heavy question, which I contacted one of the biggest gedolim in the Litvische world. And he told me, will it be machazik the person? Will it help him? And he said, definitely. So he says, there's no shiloh. If you go and can give him chizik and he can get his life straightened out, without a doubt, go. And then I said, should my wife go? He says, no, if she's not negay, if she doesn't have to, it's not helping, it's not a problem. And then I asked in general, what happens, because this person then told me, if you already have a Rav that understands to mental health, to going to group, he said sometimes they can't use like the side of the church and they have to do it almost in the sanctuary or at the side. Is he permitted to go there? And his Rav said, definitely. Now again, I would just tell you, speak to Rabbanim that are knowledgeable, this shouldn't be a heter. But that was the one time that I was there, my wife was outside, just along the line on a cute anecdote level. Like, after 6 months, you just say congratulations, you bring a little drink. Since this guy was a from Haimish Yid, he brought cakes and stuff. These guys go, we've never seen a party like this, even someone sober for 20 years. And here this guy is 6 months to a year and brought a whole Haimish Tikkun L'chaim. But Baruch Hashem, this guy is probably now about 4 or 5 years, or 6 years clean now. Is that often, is that common that when people have a shiloh, are they allowed to go to the churches? Because they're usually the ones that open up the doors for it.
I was told by Rabbi Tendler that his father-in-law, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, Zechariah Levrocha, had said that in Protestant churches, because they do not have statues, that it is permissible to go into the basement or the social hall, but not into the chapel where they pray. Now, I didn't see that in writing, but that is the verbal statement that I have that Rabbi Moshe Feinstein said. So many people rely on that heter.
Yeah. But, okay, let's go ahead. Thank you for that question. Let's go to Esther on line 3. Esther.
Hello.
Yes, you're on the air with Rabbi Dr. Twerski.
Thanks for taking my question. I was really going to ask something else, but Rabbi Twerski was talking about confidence and self-esteem, so I want to ask a question along that topic. What could you do, what's the position of a wife whose husband lacks self-esteem?
Whoa.
The question of the wife...
what should a wife do if the husband lacks
What
self-esteem?
can the wife do?
Obviously, what the wife is going to try to do is going to try to build him up and compliment him and especially point out his strengths. However, I must tell you that for me that didn't work. I knew what my successes were, but the force crushing me, which I believe was the Yetzer Hara, was so powerful that didn't work. And I think that the wife could say to him, look there, you are such a wonderful person, right? You have so many positives about you, and you're not aware of them. You might refer him to the first chelik of Alei Shur by Reb Shlomo Walbe, who has a whole section on self-knowledge, self-awareness. And he's very, very firm, and he says that without a self-awareness, it's a very strong statement. He said, without a true self-awareness, right, you cannot really have avodas Hashem. A very powerful statement that self-esteem is necessary for avodas Hashem. But you can't do it, right? In spite of your fact to build him up, it's something that you can make him aware of, refer him to the chapter in Alei Shur, Reb Shlomo Walbe.
Is that a sefer?
I'm sorry? Yes,
is that a book?
It's a Mussar Sefer, Alei Shur. Alei Shur by the great Mussar authority of this generation. And he talks very strongly about Das Atzmenu, knowing ourselves, not having false ideas about ourselves. We have to know... I'm sorry?
I find that one thing, I don't know how to explain it, sort of helps out a little, and that's if I don't know how to say it, I sort of throw him away.
I saw that.
I stop complimenting. I just say, "Come on, you can do it," or "I can't do this for you."
Yeah, well, look, you got to be careful because a person who has low self-esteem may back away from doing things because he doesn't think he's capable of doing it, and at that time you might think it's helpful that you do it for him. But that's in addiction we call that enabling, and that's a mistake. And you have to let the person perhaps even stub his toes. But look, I know you can do it, so go ahead, because it is important. Even though success isn't the total answer to it, it certainly does help build up a person's self-esteem when he succeeds at something. But again, you're not going to be able to give him self-esteem in spite of your best efforts. But what you can do is tell him, look there, you're such a wonderful person, you have so many miles. It's a shame that you're not aware of your strengths, because you could be so much happier if you really knew how good a person you were and the enormous skills and talents that you have.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And the number to call and to ask your question is 718-683-5858. That's 718-683-5858. We have, again, it's the program Let's Grow Together with your host Mordechai Weinberger, LCSW. I have the great honor and covet of having Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twerski over here to answer your questions in this week's program. So the number to call in is 718-683-5858. I would like to discuss, you've recently come out with the newest book, and
Yes.
it's called The Rabbi and the Nuns.
The Rabbi and the Nuns. Yeah, that was, I decided to write something about my 20 years of, first of all, being director of psychiatry in a Catholic hospital, and the fact that I became consultant for the diocese, the Catholic diocese in Pittsburgh, to help them deal with the problems among the priests and sisters.
Wait, can I just cut in the middle? I'm looking at you with a long beard and with a bekitche. I'm assuming you're Chassidish Yid.
Right.
How does that work with a diocese and the Chassidish Rav?
No problem at all. In fact, when the bishop called me and told me that he wanted me to develop a program to help some of the sisters and the nuns and the priests, and he said, look, I can't send them to the average psychiatrist because the average psychiatrist will attack their religion, right? But I know that they'll be safe with you. So I said to him, Bishop, isn't it strange that you're turning to a rabbi for help with problems in the church? Right? So the bishop said, Rabbi, even in the worst of times, and you know there were plenty of times when the Catholic Church was not friendly to Jews, he says, even in the worst of times, the popes had Jewish doctors. I said, well, Bishop, no, you got yourself a Jewish doctor. And, you know, you're in line. You've got a candidate that you might become Pope one day. But what's going to happen if I am going to be your doctor and the Pope will have a psychiatrist as his doctor? What's that going to look like? So the book, the Rabbi and the Nuns, talks about my experiences working with the Catholic Church and working with the nuns and the priests. And some very fascinating stories there, some very interesting cases. But it was never any problem. I want to tell you something very interesting, that on many occasions I met with the bishop, and later he became cardinal, and I met with him when he was cardinal. But whenever we finished our meeting, before I would leave, he would bow his head and say, Rabbi, please bless me.
Wow.
So that was a kind of interesting relationship.
Kiddush Hashem.
Right.
Let me ask you, that sefer, that book that you wrote, The Rabbi and the Nuns, is it something that we can take out? Because our scroll wrote it and our scroll printed it.
It's not our
it's not our scroll.
Menucha Press.
Menucha Press. So I'm sure that there's something that we can take out from person. What can you share us, let's say, an anecdote or a story there that we can...
Well, first of all, I reported on some cases that I had, and some were some very interesting cases. For example, and this has nothing to do with the church, it just happened to be one of the cases that I dealt with. This was a man who was in his early 40s, and he had been given a diagnosis of a malignant disease, and he was told that he had 18 months to live, even with medication. And he was shattered. And I told him, look, I do treat depressions, but I treat the depression when the depression is an illness. But if you've been given a diagnosis that you have only 18 months to live and you're depressed over that, I mean, I wish I could do something about that, but that is not a depressive illness. That's a normal depression. And then he said, well, there's another thing. I have to go to the hospital every 2 weeks for tests, and I have a terrible phobia of going into a hospital. I said, well, look, whatever I can do for you, I can help you overcome the phobia. So I used hypnosis to help him overcome the phobia. And I had them in hypnotic trance. And then it occurred to me to tell him, now, when you're in hypnosis, I want you to visualize this scene. I want you to visualize a chasana, a wedding, where there's music and dancing and merrymaking. I want you to visualize Simchas Torah. I want you to visualize Purim. And I want you to feel the simcha that goes on. So we did that, and we practiced that. And then I said, now look, whenever you feel depressed, I want you to say the word simcha. Because what we are doing now is we are going to, whenever you have visualize these simcha scenes, you're depositing feelings of simcha into a bank account in your brain, right? And you'll have to do this repeatedly, several times a day, to visualize these scenes and reinforce your simcha. And then anytime you become depressed, you say to yourself the word simcha. That will trigger your mind to produce a feeling of simcha no matter what your circumstances are. We worked at this for a long time, and he became good at it. And Baruch Hashem, all I can tell you was this was in maybe 72 or 73. I still talk with him every once in a while 40 years later. Right? Wow. So he was given 18 months to live, and he's now, Baruch Hashem, more than 40 years, and I think what did it for him is the feelings of simcha. So, you know, Hasidic Sforim are so strong on it that simcha is the strength of Avodas Hashem, and you have to find ways of getting simcha.
I wonder if you remember the first time we met was several years ago. I asked you for an endorsement about the concept of sort of the way I do treatment, which is, of course, classical CBT in therapy. But I'm also a big believer in tuning in and using the subconscious. Now, you told me I give people a meeting, maybe 15 to 20 minutes. I drove down, I met you, and we ended up speaking about 2 hours. And also, you gave me the heads up that chances are you don't really give haskamas. And I walked out with a typed haskama where they were discussing. I actually want to bring it here just. We were discussing the power of the subconscious in therapy as well, that it's not everything is just cognitive or behavior, which means not that we're attacking those. Those are part of the components as well, but many times you might also need to access the subconscious. And I was so impressed that you were, I mean, to me, I assumed that you would be very only certain types of therapy. Can we discuss it, drop the subconscious mind, like fears, anxiety?
Well, of course. You know, we have to understand what we mean by the subconscious. There's two major components in our mind. One is the conscious, and that is what we are aware of at this moment. Right? We're not aware of what we did last week until we think about it, but we are aware of what we do now. The conscious mind is a paper thin. Right? Perhaps it represents 5% of the whole mind. The subconscious, or the unconscious, is like a hard drive of a computer, where everything that's ever happened to you from the day you were born is registered in the subconscious, but you have no access to it because that's by definition subconscious. You can't be conscious of it. Now, it's accessible. Sometimes the material from the subconscious comes out in dreams. Sometimes you can bring it out with hypnosis. There are different techniques in which you can try to access the subconscious. What happens is that ideas that are in the subconscious don't lie there dormant. They have an effect on our thoughts and feelings and behavior. A perfect example is a grown man. He's grown, he's 6'3", weighs 240 pounds, right? And when he sees a little puppy, he breaks out in a panic, right? Now, why? Well, he has a phobia of dogs. Why? When he was 4 years old, a great big dog jumped on him and barked at him, right? And that was impressed on the subconscious, and here he is 40 years later, right, still reacting to a puppy as though it was a monster. That's just an example of the kinds of things that can happen. There's also many sources of anxiety that are in the subconscious. For example, what is anxiety? Technically, Anxiety is the same as fear, except that fear is when you have the object or the situation which is causing you the fear, right? I mean, if you're in an airplane and you have a sudden drop of several hundred feet, right, and you feel that the plane might crash, that's a fear. That's understandable fear. However, if you're sitting at home reading a book, reading a magazine, or in the supermarket shopping, and all of a sudden you have the same feeling as though the plane was going to crash, right? That is a fear without anything to be afraid of. That's what we refer to as anxiety. Now, many of the sources of anxiety are due to feelings that are happenings and experiences that are stored in the subconscious or the unconscious, and they affect the way we feel. And there's no rational feeling for a reason for them.
Yeah. Let's go ahead. We're going to go to line 2. Thank you for holding so long, and we know the people are holding a while. If we can just see what's line 2 is Rivka. Rivka, thank you for holding on, and you're on the air with Mordechai, yes, and Dr. Twerski.
Yes, hi, how are you?
Baruch Hashem.
I wanted to know how is the best way to install self-esteem and self-confidence in the children? And I wanted to know what we have to do the person that has a negative energy on the person, like even if happy and she is happy, and talk to a person that bring him down, how we have to act with such a person. It's two different questions.
Let's see. Your first question is, how do you build a positive self-esteem in your children?
Yes.
Okay.
Because even we try to encourage them, but still feel that some kids, they are missing self-esteem.
Yes. First of all, there is an excellent book, Building Self-Esteem in Children. The author is Patricia... I'll have to think of the moment. At my age, my memory doesn't work good.
Tia?
No. I don't remember her name, but you get it by the title, Building Self-Esteem in Children.
What about one of your books? I noticed that you're mentioning everyone else's. You've written, I think, 80-something books last time we spoke?
Not 80. I've got a way to go to 80. I've written 70.
70, I'm sorry. And I know many of them are about self-esteem. Let's start. Which one of your books would you recommend for self-esteem?
There's several books. First of all, the first one that I wrote is titled Let Us Make Man. That's still in print. Yeah. There's another book entitled Angels Don't Leave Footprints. That's about self-esteem. There's a book entitled Life's Too Short. Life's Too Short talks about the kinds of things that we do as a result of low self-esteem, the different behavior patterns. And then there's a book called 10 Steps to Being Your Best, which is a guideline to how to develop better feelings of self-esteem. Now, in that book, Building Self-Esteem in Children, I know the author, and she made the statement about how important it is to give your children self-esteem. And I said to her, Patricia, you can't give children self-esteem, right? You can provide an environment where hopefully they will build self-esteem, but it's not something you can give them. But there are things that we can do that she points out that can be very helpful in building self-esteem. For example, she mentions that you ought to compliment your children, but only realistically. Don't give them false compliments because they'll see through it. Right? An example, when my grandson was 7 years old, he took a few violin lessons. And then he comes in with his violin, and he says, Zayda, do you want to hear me play the violin? I said, of course. Well, he took the violin very proudly and started to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, totally off tune. My first reaction was to say, that's beautiful. But then I realized it was not beautiful. Right? So instead I said, I know that tune. Play it again and I'll sing it with you. Right? So he had a great feeling. He played it. I sang it along with him. I did not give him a false compliment. Just one of the little tricks that this author mentions. But it's a good book on building self-esteem in children. I did not write it because I never treated children, and so I did not have any hands-on experience in children. I did participate in writing a book called Positive Parenting, which also addresses the problem of self-esteem, and I wrote it together with a very fine child psychologist, so it's authoritative based on the child psychologist's contribution rather than mine.
Said very humbly, I can imagine. All right, let's go take one or two questions. If we can refresh from the Lakewood Scoop. Let's go see. We've got a lot of questions over there. So let's go see what we've got. Okay, let's see. I have a son that needs medication. He is so nervous, and I'm a natural person. Are there really so many negative side effects to medication? Are there natural vitamins that one can take instead?
I think you have to find out from somebody who is well versed on an alternative medicine. But you have to realize that because something comes from a health food store rather than from the pharmacy, that does not mean that it isn't full of chemicals, right? For example, a popular antidepressant in the health food stores is St. John's wort. Well, it has an antidepressant chemical in it, right? Now, if you find any kind of medication that has absolutely no side effects at all, it means it's worthless. Because you cannot introduce a chemical into the human body which may not in one way or another have effect. There may be a mild side effect, but they can all have side effects. If aspirin had to come on the market today, it would never make it, because aspirin has many, many side effects, and yet it's a miracle drug. So it's possible that there are side effects. You have to find out what they are. Many of them are negligible. Some are more serious, and you have to, for example, let me give you a simple example. Back in 1962, I was already being trained as a psychiatrist. I developed a very...
I love this story, by the way. I heard it, and I couldn't believe how you disclosed the story.
Well, I developed a very severe depression. It was horrible. And I thought I would go in to talk to one of my professors, but I was afraid to open up to them because they'd kick me out of the program. But finally, when it got so bad that I couldn't tolerate it anymore, I asked my professor for help. And he listened to me and he said, Abe, are you taking any medications? I said, just something over the counter for the hay fever. He says, well, why don't you stop it and see what happens? Well, I stopped the hay fever medication, and within 2 weeks my depression was gone. And then I found in an article in the American Journal of Psychiatry that decongestants have a possible side effect, and people who are sensitive to them can develop depression. Now, 1,000 people can take this medication without developing depression. I happen to be sensitive and developed a depression. So you can develop side effects from any medication, whether it comes from a pharmacy or a health food store. You just have to be knowledgeable and alert, and then you have to weigh sometimes the pros and cons.
Yes. All right, let's go ahead. We have Mimi waiting a while on the line. Mimi on line 6. You're on the air with Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twerski.
Hello?
Yes.
Thank you so much for taking my call.
I'm listening.
Yes, I just want to know if you can give me some advice.
Where are you calling from? We notice an accent.
London.
Oh, calling all the way from London.
All right. I must tell you that I don't hear too well. I have a hearing disorder, so Rabbi Weingarten may have to interpret it for me. Go ahead.
Or you can speak a little louder.
My husband suffers from depression and ADHD, and I just want to find out what tips you have, how to deal with them.
Her husband suffers from depression and ADHD, and she wants to know what tips she can have how to manage it.
Well, of course, there are two ways to approach any of these conditions. There are some people who have had success even without medications by using cognitive behavior therapy, which is very good, and within good hands, it can help a great deal in depression. ADD or ADHD may require medication, and sometimes the medication for ADHD may also help the depression. But we have to understand depressions, and I have to do a little bit of a clarification here. Depression is a descriptive term describing how a person feels, right? It is also a term that you use as a diagnosis. He has a depression. Now, if a person, God forbid, loses a family member, right? They're in grief, they're sad, they're depressed. That is not a depression. That is not an illness. That is not something that one takes medication for. Then there's a person who has an attitudinal feeling that the world is just not a good place to be. And this person may be from childhood on, has been looking at the world as a negative place and chronically unsatisfied, chronically depressed. That's a personality kind of thing, which I think can be helped very well by good psychotherapy and usually does not respond to medication. Then we have the third kind, which is due to some kind of chemical upset within the system, like the one I had when I took that decongestant. Or it can be due to a virus, or it can be due to surgery, or it can be due to excessive stress, or it can be due to genetic. Something has gone wrong within the body's chemistry that causes a person to feel depressed. Now, that kind of depression very often responds very well to the appropriate medication, but it means that somebody has to evaluate what the condition is. So it's a shame to suffer needlessly. And I think a person who is depressed, and when you feel depressed, you lose your energy, you lose your fun for life, you lose your ability to interact properly with your family. It's important that one tries to get over the depression. In Hasidic writings, the emphasis is very strongly to get rid of atzvut, to get rid of depression. And the great Tzaddik Rabbi of Kalin says, the Torah never said that atzvus is a sin. But there's nothing that can cause so much sinfulness as atzvus, right? So we have to find ways of overcoming atzvus, whether it's with psychotherapy or appropriate medication. So I think you tell your husband, look, my dear, I can see how you're hurting. I can see how you're suffering. There's no reason to suffer unnecessarily when there is help available. And encourage him to get some help with his depression and the ADHD, of course.
Is that okay?
Sometimes there's a financial situation also, so you can't afford the therapy. So what do we...
Well, yeah, look, financial situations that cause depressions are not going to be treated by chemicals. If a person doesn't have enough to pay the rent or to pay the tuition, that is a kind of grief reaction, understandable. And there a person has to be helped with coping skills. And it's not easy, right? But this is where our strength in emunah and betochen come in, to try and help a person over a difficult period in life. Yes, sometimes the psychologist can be helpful there also, but this is a reality-oriented depression where a person has to be able to be strengthened to deal with the difficult reality. And there are some people, especially some Rabbanim, who have a intuitive way of giving people chizuk to overcome difficult parts of life.
She also mentioned that her husband has a difficulty affording therapy.
Almost in every community, I realize that this is so. Almost in every community, there are organizations, Bikur Cholim or something like that, that offer therapy at a sliding fee scale. Because it is true, you know, therapists also have to make a living; they have to be compensated. But there are in many Jewish communities some very fine clinics that offer therapy at a very reduced price.
So just to mention, here in Brooklyn, we have Jewish Board of Family Services, we have OHEL. I'm just thinking offhand of any of the other organizations that they have. You've got in Williamsburg, you've got Bikur Cholim, you've got Pesach Tikva. You've got some wonderful places where they have very good therapists, and it's even compensated where the government is paying for it, where they're accepting Medicaid and Medicare. I don't know what's happening in England, but I know they have that here at least in the United States, and I know an upstate as well, where that's over there. Thank you for that question. I appreciate it. And again, for those of you tuning in, you're listening to Let's Grow Together with your host Mordechai Weinberger, LCSW. We have the great honor of co-hosting, or having over here Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twerski, MD, which is from the first pioneers, I would probably say from the first Frum therapist, which really has made therapy a pioneer therapy in the Frum world where we have it today. A prolific author which has written several books, and recently the latest book that has just come out, The Rabbi and the Nuns, but I feel talking about the books is also undercutting all the Sfarim that you wrote. So I have your Sefer Twerski on the Chumash. I've just recently gotten, one of my best friends told me, you must buy the Sefer for Rosh Hashanah. It's a machzer, but it has a little parish and stories. I asked him, who is he? He says, Rabbi Twerski wrote a couple of Nakudas over there on the Parsha, on the Tefillah, on the davening. And he said, once you take that with you along the machzer, just a story, a little anecdote, it just changes the whole concept of davening. So I feel giving the title just talking about psychology over here is almost undercutting the part of the amount of Svarim that you've written.
Well, there's some wonderful sources of strength in Sipurei Tzadikim. Baruch Hashem, that I was exposed through my father and mother to many stories that were handed down from generation to generation, and other sources as well. And I think that Sipurei Tzadikim are a very strong source of chizuk at any point in life. So I strongly advise. I wrote a book called Not Just Stories, where I chose stories that have a strong message. I wrote a book about my great-grandfather, Zeder Motala, also some very powerful stories. So, and then I wrote the books on Shabbos and on Tfilat Shabbos and on Machzah, again with many Pirushim and stories also. One that just came out last month is a very interesting book called The Messages from the Mishnah. Because when we look at Mishnah, Mishnah is halacha. And what we don't realize is that there's so many Musa messages in the Mishnah that we might overlook. So I have this book, turned out to be a huge book, Messages from the Mishnah.
Wow. Let me ask you one question. How do you address it? Because I get this right and left, and we have it several times in the program, where someone asks, why is everything a diagnosis? Why isn't it just that someone is missing a little musar, or he has bad midas? And how do we differentiate? How do you actually differentiate between when it's a psychological disorder and when it's musar? And part two is, shouldn't musar be able to heal everything?
Well, I think that musar is extremely important because, yes, there are psychological problems, but even if all psychological problems are resolved, a person is not going to be happy unless a person is fulfills oneself. Now, Hashem created us not to be animals, not to be intellectual animals. I mean, science says that a human being is a Homo sapiens. Well, that's a Latin word which really means it's a baboon with intellect. I don't believe that a human being is a baboon with intellect. I mean, a person has an neshama, right? And just like the body has to be fed nutrients, the neshama has to be fed its nutrients. And the proper nutrients for the neshama is mitzvahs and midos. Midos are so tremendously important to be able to overcome gaiva, to be able to overcome anger, to be able to overcome kina, jealousy, and envy. Those are destructive midos. And that I don't think is within the realm of psychotherapy. Right? I think that a person should work on oneself with the help of a Rov, with the help of Talmud Chochem, with the help of the Sifrei Musa, to recognize and fulfill oneself, to provide the neshama with its needs. And I have one book written that there is a diagnosis that I make that's called spirituality deficiency. Right? Now, if a person is deficient in vitamin D or vitamin C or iron, he's going to have a deficiency syndrome with symptoms. And I think that if a person is deficient in spirituality, who lacks the kind of midas that the neshama wants, right, he's going to have a spirituality deficiency syndrome in which he may be chronically unhappy. Right? And the answer to that is, the solution to that is the development of proper midos, which we have access to through our Sefarim and through our Gedolei Torah.
And so is there ever room for a mental disorder of OCD, anxiety, stress, depression? Or would you just say take out a Musa Sefer and everything will be better?
The great Godel of this last generation, with whom I was fortunate to have a close relationship, was the Steipeler. Right? And the Steipeler Gaon made this wonderful statement: Nerven is nicht kein Frumkeit. Right? meaning that if a person has kinds of symptoms of OCD, right? He doesn't feel that he's washed his hands adequately. He doesn't feel that he's davening properly, and he has to repeat each word 6 times. That kind of thing, he says, that's not frumkeit. That's a neurosis and that has to be treated. So, yes, there are things that we have to identify as problems of OCD or other mental conditions, and there are kinds of things that we have to identify as being deficiencies either in halacha or musa.
Okay. We are going to go to Chana. Chana, you're on the air with Dr. Twerski. And again, the number to call in, we have a special host, a special joint program where you can ask any question to Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twerski in our studio live. You can also watch us live on the Lakewood Scoop on Yeshiva World and, of course, on the jrootradio.com. The number to call in if you'd like to ask your question, it's 718-683-5858, 718-683-5858. And actually, we are going to go to line 3. We're going to go to Dina first. Dina, you're on the air with Mordechai and especially with Rabbi Dr. Twerski.
Is that me?
Yes, that's you.
Okay, well, I accumulated 3 questions from when I called. I had 1, and now I have 2 more. So I guess I'll start with the most important and see where that goes. Do you hear echo? Because I hear echo.
We hear a slight echo, but it's okay. We can hear you.
Okay, maybe this is going to be better. No. Okay. My first question is that I'm in ACA now, which is Adult Children of Alcoholics, and I'm also in a non-program for my husband, who I now divorced. And I have very few memories of my childhood, and I was talking about it with my sponsor, and who helps me do stuff, and she said that if God didn't give you these memories, then it means that now He doesn't want you to have these memories, and one day He'll give them back to you. And I'm wondering if I should wait until those memories come back, or if I should do some sort of subconscious kind of therapy to get those memories and be able to work a better program.
The subconscious is sub because that's what it's supposed to be, right? And we talk about the problems of denial, but we have to realize that there's a good part of denial also, because there are some things that we simply cannot handle, and so the system takes care of it by denying its existence. Now, denial can be very destructive if it's handled improperly, but there are things that are in the subconscious that should be left alone, and to try to get them, yes, they could be sometimes brought out with hypnosis, but if you're going to do that, you have to have someone who is really expert, really adept in hypnotherapy, so that the memories can be brought back at a rate in which you can accept them. Because sometimes a memory can be so traumatic that if it's brought back, you can't handle it. So you have to be very cautious about eliciting early memories. But having said that, I think that it's possible to deal with the effect of some of the memories, even though the memory itself hasn't been graphically described. So if you're working with your therapist, working with your sponsor, you can work around those things without having to wait for the actual memory to recur.
That's very interesting. You're saying that I could work on the effects of what happened without even knowing what happened.
Right. Also, and I'm not adept in this, but I'm going to mention it because the people said that it works, and that is EMDR. Yes. Which is a very effective form of therapy to deal with post-traumatic conditions and with memories that have been repressed. And a good practitioner in EMDR can help you deal with some of the early memories, some of which may be brought up to consciousness, and some of which not, but their effects can be dealt with.
That's interesting. Okay, could I ask another question?
You're on.
Okay. So in my program, in my non-program, a lot of the husbands, it will be the husbands who are the addicted, and a lot of them have dropped religion. And when I speak to people who are still married to their husbands, I cannot understand how they can still love, respect, and trust their husband when he is completely not religious. And maybe you have some insight.
Yeah, well, of course, this is a problem that occasionally arises with even with the absence of addiction, where either the husband or the wife, even though they were both frum when they got married, one goes discards the religion and becomes non-observant, and that takes an individual assessment, because I remember one case in which the wife was away from the husband, discarded religion, but was very respectful. Never did anything in the house on Shabbos that was improper, right? Never allowed the children to see any kind of improper behavior. And she decided that she loved the husband, and unfortunately he wasn't on the same page with her religion. So they were able to live together, and apparently had a good marriage. Now, there are other situations in which there's such great conflict that they can't possibly resolve it by themselves. And then the thing to do is to find a good therapist, a marriage counselor, somebody who is sensitive to these issues, and to see whether those things can be worked out to be able to preserve the relationship.
Mm-hmm. I think in a few cases that I know of, the husband is more like, yeah, just do whatever you want as long as I don't have to be religious. Like, the wife decides where they're going to school and all the religious things the wife really decides on.
I would also like to clarify a little in your question, because I'm seeing that quite a bit, and I'm reading about it, and I'm speaking to the Rabbanim that are finding this issue. And that's why I'd like to even clarify your question. There are people that will still keep, quote-unquote, their lavush. So if it's a Chassidish, they'll still keep it. If it's Litvish, they'll still do that.
Yeah.
They just quietly will turn on the air conditioner if they're hot, or turn on or watch a movie quietly, but they won't change anything, which means at the Seder, they'll still run a Seder. They'll still sit at a Shabbos table. They'll still have the Zmiris. In other words, they're saying they're not dropping it outside. Is that what you're referring to? I know some people listening might have never heard of that, but unfortunately, that's happening now. And what I'm finding that the Rabbanim are dealing now to combat this is to start creating outreach, sort of what we have in the Kiruv world. Now, in-reach for the frum people when they're turning 35, 40, or between the ages of 25 and 45 is where I'm seeing this happening, where people are saying, I'm religious and I don't even know why. And the old answer is just because we did that is not enough for that age, where we're now at an age of understanding, and we want to understand, why am I doing this? Rabbi Twerski, what would you say about that?
100%. I think that some of this can be helped with proper education, and to help people know who are doing things by rote, because that's the way it was done, to help them understand why they're doing it, to give them a better understanding of Torah and mitzvahs. I think that's extremely important. But again, it's an individual situation where I think this can be one area where there can be a very effective combined approach between a Rav and a therapist. And I've seen those work very well, where the therapist feels that he or she does not have the kind of resources to address some of the client's questions, and so the Rav and the therapist work together in a harmonious relationship.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and can I ask my last question?
Go right ahead.
Okay, so I'm hearing a lot about spirituality, like 12 Steps is a spiritual program, not a religious program, and I just don't get what spirituality is.
All right, I alluded to this a little bit earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I have this in my book called Happiness and the Human Spirit. Okay? And I point out, as I pointed out, that the body is one part of us, the spirit is another part. Right? The spirit has its needs for nutrition just like the body. Right? And the spirit needs to, let me just define, what is the spirit, right? The spirit is that force within us which looks for a meaning in life. The spirit is that force within us which tries to help others with chesed, right? This is not an animalistic kind of thing. right? Animals don't do chesed with strangers, right? The spirit is that part within us which to develop a relationship with Hashem. The spirit is that part of us which can forgive others. The spirit is that part of us which can overcome our desire to take revenge and to act out our anger. All of these are spiritual components. And I say what spirituality is developing all of the midos that are part of the human spirit that animals do not have. Right? All of these things that I mentioned are traits that are uniquely human. And developing them to the fullest makes us the best human being possible. So if you take a sefer such as Ochos Tzadikim, which is a ancient Musar sefer, which talks about the various traits that a human being has, or the one that I mentioned before, Ale Shua Baravalbe, which talks about human traits, and developing the midos, that is what develops spiritual. When you develop the components of the spirit, that's when you become spiritual.
Okay.
Thank you for calling in.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We appreciate it. We are going to go to line 1. Bella, you're on the air with Mordechai and especially with Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twerski, MD.
Hi, do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. And also thank you for holding a while. You must be holding almost a half hour or so.
It's all right. I'm actually honored. I'm enjoying listening until I get my turn. I have a certain behavior pattern that I think it's negative. I don't like it. It's been a part of me for many years. And because I am a 12-stepper, I'm repeatedly trying to take it through the 12 steps. So I just keep saying, I'm actually not sure if I'm powerless and I have to wait for this to change, or if it's a part of me that I have to work on. And as many times as I try, I'm falling back into my old behavior. It's very subtle, and it's not like people are suffering from me daily. It's very deep and subtle, and as time is passing, it's coming up to the fore. And I don't know if I just have to say, I am powerless over this. Actually, I was reading a chapter in the Alcoholics Anonymous yesterday, and I identified with this behavior as I don't know if I'm allowed to say it's not in my control. I don't know if I have to give it over or I have to sort of work on it.
Look, there are some conditions that we have that are part of our personality. And sometimes if they're not interfering with our function and we recognize them, then, for example, we know OCD is a significant condition which can cause a great deal of dysfunction in life. But then there's a mild form of, you might think of OCPD, which is a personality type where a person, he doesn't have rituals, but he's perfectionistic. Things have to be just so, whatever, and if not, he's uncomfortable. Right? That can be a, quote, a variant of normal. It doesn't have to be considered pathological. Right? And if it isn't interfering with himself or with anybody else's, then he can just accept that, hey, that's part of me. That's the way I am. If it becomes in any way dysfunctional, either for him or affecting somebody else, then I think he or she has to get some therapy with it. But I don't know what particular behavior you're referring to, and it may not be comfortable for you to discuss this openly. But I suggest that, at least for evaluate it, see a therapist and go over the particular behavior and in some detail, and then you find out whether this is something that you should just accept as part of yourself. Just like there's some allergies that we have that are part of ourselves. Okay? It doesn't mean that not everything has to be, quote, cured, right? There's some things that we can accept as part of our normal selves. And there's a wonderful book that was put out many years ago. It's probably out of print, called Your Normal Mind, right? Where the author points out that there are a lot of quirks of behavior that don't have to be considered pathological. And so this is something that you should see somebody about, a mental health professional about, to get a feeling about, is this one of the normal variants, or is this something that you should do something about?
Thank you so much. Can I ask one more?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm also seeing lately some parts of me that are bothering my husband. He actually just told me about it, but they're bothering him. And I don't know where to draw the line between saying, this is me, and, you know, just be assertive, or saying, sure, I'm going to try to fix it and do everything for you to be happy.
Yeah, I don't think you should try to answer that question yourself. I think you ought to consult somebody to get a professional opinion on that. Because, you know, there are times when, especially in children, where a child will have a particular kind of behavior that's very concerning to the parents. And somebody will say, well, it's a phase, let him, he'll get over it, or she'll get over it. And I said, that may be true, but that decision should be made by a professional. I remember many years ago, one of my children had a behavior problem, and I consulted at that time my teacher in child psychiatry, and she said, Abe, leave it alone, it'll go away. And it did, but I had a professional evaluation of that. So I think that when you come to these questions, it's not good to make the decision by yourself, because we have so many things that can interfere with our making a proper decision. I would take it to a professional evaluation.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I would just like to, on the Lakewood Scoop, we've got a couple of questions over here, and I would just like to address one of them. One of them is from Al-Anon. It says, it's number 5, where it says, why are there no from AA and Al-Anon meetings in Lakewood? There are, if we can just scroll down so I can finish reading the whole thing, on number 5, yes. There are other 12 steps. There are no other 12 steps programs here, but none for alcoholics and families of alcoholics. Is it due to a lack of alcoholics? Well, first I'd like you to know that there is in Brick, which is the town right across, which is about a 10-minute drive from within Lakewood, that I know of, that there is an Al-Anon group and an AA group. Aaron, if we can just lower, there seems to be a noise to cut one of the people off the line. Right, thank you. And I know that there is, my last count, there was up to 20 from people actually in that Al-Anon group. And I know the AA group as well. So in Brick Hospital, there is AA group. So what I would tell you is, let's stop making assumptions that there are or what there aren't. And what I would ask anyone that's suffering, that needs this help, just call up the AA, the main center, and they have a listing of all the places where they are. And once you just start, and anywhere next to you, you'll find out that there are other ones. You'll find a from person there and say, oh, I go to a different group. Some groups are once a week, some groups are twice a week, some are more. And I personally know that there's this same organization, Yad B'Yad, which is where I volunteer, and they actually have therapists volunteering to have the groups. And I know that Yad B'Yad has a women's group of a 12-step run by a fantastic therapist. So, believe it or not, there actually are groups in Lakewood, and it's under the Rabbanim Haskama. I would like you to be aware, when people are saying the Rabbanim aren't knowledgeable and they're not giving Haskamas, that is not true. Let's get updated. This organization, Yad B'Yad, I'm running, and I volunteered for the first men's group. But they have over 10 groups going on. Each and every one of them are run and guided by a Rav. Not run by a Rav, but his guidance, and we discussed it ahead of time working it out. So please, let's recognize there is so much out there. And I know in Brooklyn of 1 or 2 different organizations which are hosting and which are having Al-Anon groups. So it's all around. I know Maimonides has them over there. So this is just 1 or 2 that I know of, but just call them up and we'll find out. We're going to go to line 2. Avi, you've held a while. So let's go to line 2. Avi, you're on the air with Rabbi Dr. Twerski.
Yes, my question is for Twerski. What do you think, as a self-therapy, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov's Eitzer of Hisbodedus?
What do you think for self-therapy of Reb Nachman Breslov's Sefer of Hisbodedus for self-therapy?
Let's realize that Hisbodedus is found in all the Chassidus Forum and all the Musas Forum, and that many tzaddikim used to go away from the town and go into the woods where there would be no distractions and just be Hisboded between themselves and Hashem. And it's a wonderful way of meditation. Incidentally, meditation has been given a bad press because everybody thinks that meditation is an Oriental thing and therefore it has the Oriental Avodah Zorah. That's not so. There's a book by Arya Kaplan on meditation. And meditation, it's as old as they come. The Talmud says that the earlier tzaddikim used to meditate for an hour before davening. Right? Now, I wish we did that. No, unfortunately, we come into the shul, we put our talis and tefillin, we daven, and we leave. That's not what was the way it should be done. So, his bodhidus and meditation can be very helpful. Now, the fact that it can be helpful doesn't mean that it can cure pneumonia. Right? If there's an illness that needs to be dealt with. So I think that his bodhidus, like Rabbi Nachman has, is very powerful and very helpful. But if there are symptoms that the person has, should be evaluated whether this is something that is a neshama kind of thing, whether this is a kind of nefesh kind of thing, or is this the kind of thing that needs the help of a psychotherapist?
Yes, I have one other quick question for Mordechai.
Certainly.
Yes, do you still practice one brain?
Okay, let's address this. Actually, I don't. I've taken a lot of the theories and the principles that I believe, and for those of you that know a little about me, I am a huge believer in conventional therapy, in CBT. In fact, I've got training in that, in EMDR, and a lot of the trainings that there are with it. I plan on, now actually signed up for the DBT just to get the basic dialectical behavioral therapy. But at the same time, I'm also a believer in a lot of the subconscious alternative therapists. And one of them is hypnosis, EMDR, which is actually more of a classical and turning more conventional. But there's EFT, which I've taken training, and as well as a system which is not that popular here in the United States called One Brain, which is similar to HK, Health Kinesiology. However, for various reasons, I've taken the principles of it, which I'm a big believer in, and I've helped to make it on a way that it fits with modern psychology. So I've found different ways of accessing, let's say, the subconscious when the person's awake, to be able to go back in time gently to a process of when the trauma or when the behavior might have started, and as well as also anchor it in, similar to NLPs, in the future also, so the subconscious, while you're awake, to be able to have a new image or a new destination. However, the actual one brain system itself, I have not done in years. So I appreciate the question, but no, for various reasons, you need to actually physically touch someone, and being that I'm a therapist and touch and with what's going on, it was not appropriate. So it's about a good 7 to 10 years that it's not in practice by me.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome. I'd like to give, someone has written something on the Lakewood Scoop, and I'd like to mention it. So a person wrote over here, Rabbi Ephraim Glassman is a very experienced and has helped me get my meds regulated. He even went with me to Dr. Grossman to make sure that I was on the right track. I am now learning in your yeshiva. I'm not going to announce it publicly. He saved my life, and without a penny. So Rabbi Ephraim Glassman is someone that I know well, and he's a wonderful person. He's got several tape lectures which explains OCD and how to help that, and many or most of the machanchim go ahead and speak to him about about questions, and it comes to him, and he does it without a penny. He is a tzaddik. Dr. Grossman, I'm assuming you're referring to Dr. Robert Grossman, one of the top psychiatrists which we have in the city, which we use, and also an unbelievable, wonderful shliach. And many times the information that the psychiatrists get are not, or we're not reporting it well enough, but someone that, let's say a therapist or someone that has experience, can clarify symptoms that you're feeling so the doctor can regulate them. I mean, that's something that Dr. Twerski, you can tell us with medication, that many times when people would report certain symptoms, or they're feeling better, but they're not clarifying that they haven't yet reached the optimum zone. So many times the doctor will say, okay, then we'll leave it here. Well, we might need to raise it or change something. So having, let's say, someone come along with you that understands or that can speak to the psychiatrist will help the situation or help the therapy process. Right. So yes, Rabbi Glassman's there are a lot of people out there that can help you, and they will not take money for that. So thank you for that and for mentioning what a wonderful tzaddik he is. Yes. There's a question over here that they would ask, can you discuss a little about emotional eating? I understand that people can use food the same way as they use other drugs, as alcohol, and the 12-step, and they've tried this 12-step program. I found that they have backfired. Whereas a person can decide to never have drugs and alcohol again, food is something that is necessary for living. What do you believe is the best way to deal with this food addiction?
Well, I happen to be a strong advocate of the 12-step program. Now, there's variants of the 12-step program as far as eating disorders are concerned, and you may have to try several of them and see which one is best for you. I did write one book about eating disorders, and it's entitled The Thin You Within You. And this is based on my feeling that when a person uses food as a tranquilizer, which is what happens in many eating disorders, the root problem may often be a low self-esteem, and if the person had a better evaluation of oneself, they would not have that kind of anxiety which leads them to look for the relief for food. But I do think that, first of all, there are some very good therapists who deal with compulsive eating disorders, in addition to the fact that there's variations of the 12-step programs. So you have to look around and find out whichever is the one which suits your needs best. There's no way that I can say this particular group is going to be your solution. You have to look around and try it out.
All right, the number to call, and if you'd like to contact and speak to Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twerski on air live at the studio, I first got to thank you again for coming down, coming all the way in the snow. It's really and greatly appreciated, and I wanted to tell all our listeners, I really just contacted the doctor and I said, Rabbi Twerski, would you please come and join our program? And I was expecting to hear, it's difficult, I'm busy, which it is, and coming in also from a far drive. And the answer was, sure, I'd love to help Klal Yisrael. And it was just about that. And within 2 weeks, we got it going. We're here. So a big shkayach that I have an appreciation to just how easy it is, how easy you've made yourself available for everyone. So
My
thank
pleasure.
you. Let's go to Devora, and then we're going to go read question number 9 on the Lakewood Scoop. Devora on line 5. You're on the air with Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twerski.
Hello?
Yes.
Hi. I am calling, it's like a little bit of a different situation. I'm calling about my elderly father. He's a Holocaust survivor from a very rabbinic, yichastic family. And he's, lately it's been so difficult with him. It's just testing my kibbut of. I have 2 brothers, and believe me, it's testing theirs too. Negative, angry, almost belligerent. He went through. He went through the Holocaust. He came from a hush of a family where they were treated like, and then he went through the Holocaust and he married my mother, and she died. She was nifter at 50 years old from Machla, and then he remarried, and recently, Pesach time, he lost his second wife, which he lived with for 30 years, and her children sort of were in charge all those years. Now it's falling on us, and it's just been so difficult. He's never been easy. I must tell you, he has never been easy, but this is already to a new level. And like I said, it's just testing my kibbut of terribly. And I feel so guilty on the one hand, and the other hand is, I just can't. I don't know what to do.
All right, let me address some issues there. First off, if he's a Holocaust survivor, he's not a youngster.
Right. He's 90 years old.
How old? He's how old?
90.
90, right.
Almost 90, but
right.
The cup is done.
Yeah.
His head is there.
Yeah, first of all, there's significant problems when you reach that advanced age. Also, the kind of experiences that people have gone through their Holocaust, that was so out of any kind of normality, that is so absolutely horrible, horrendous, that they're left with residuals of that for the rest of their lives. Now, let me mention something that I was taught by, I think, a very wise woman. I was an intern in the hospital. This was in 1959. And in those days, there was no IV teams, so that medications, intravenous medications, had to be given by the house staff. So I was called to inject this woman with an antibiotic, and I recognized the woman was Mrs. Glass. Mrs. Glass had been the president of the ladies' auxiliary in my father's shul. She knew me before I was born, right? She was a member of our household when my mother was pregnant with me. And so she knew me ever since I was an infant. And of course I was very familiar with her. So I came in to the room and I said to her, Bubby, I'm going to give you an injection. It's going to hurt just a tiny little bit and it'll be over with. So she said, Oi, narish kind, foolish child, let it hurt. You think you want to leave the world if the world is a nice place? Huh? Now, what I recognized was that sometimes when an elderly person who realizes that their time is running out and that they're going to have to leave this world, they don't want to see the world as a nice place. It's like if you're on vacation and you have to go back, and the day that you're leaving, the sun is bright, and it's a wonderful day for fishing and a wonderful day for golf, and you have to go back to the office, you don't feel good. However, if it's a rainy day and the weather is horrible, it's so much easier to leave the vacation place. And I think what happens with some elderly people is that they are dissatisfied with everything because they need to be dissatisfied. It's going to make it easier for them to accept that their time is running out. I've talked with nurses who do home visits, and the nurse will come in, it's an elderly woman, and she says, oh, your blood pressure, you put on the cuff too tight. Oh, the bath water is too cold or it's too hot. Right. You're mixing me up about my medications. Right. And complain and complain and complain. And then when the nurse leaves, oh, when are you coming back? Right. So what happens is they need to defend themselves by making the world into a miserable place. So that may be part of what's going on with your father. He's kind of at age 90, and this may, and especially given him the kinds of things that he's gone through in his lifetime. Now, what the children have to do is, first of all, of course, you've got to do kibbud av to the degree that that is possible, being respectful to him, never shouting at him. And I know it takes a great deal of effort, but there's one thing that you mentioned, right? And that is that you feel guilty about it. That's a mistake. You're only human, right? You have to behave with kavod. You cannot help but feel the imposition. There was the gentleman in Milwaukee, where I grew up, who had an elderly father, Rabbi. I remember him very well. And the son gave kibbud av like you've never seen. My father always used to say, the way Label gives kibbud av, nobody has ever done. And Label once said to his elderly father, he says, Pa, I wouldn't give you away for $1 million, but I wouldn't give a nickel for another one of you. Right? And my father used to quote that by saying, Label is an example of kibbud av, but he does not deny the fact that this is an imposition on him. It's all right to feel that way, and there's no reason to feel guilty about it, as long as you realize that what you have to do is because kibbud av is such an enormous, enormous mitzvah, right, that you sacrifice much of your comforts in order to provide kibbud av. But you don't have to feel guilty by the fact that you recognize that it's an imposition.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but listen, you know, like the past generation, I didn't have grandparents. They were all, you know, I keep on telling my children it's such a schus and it's such a, you know, I try my best. But you're right. Listen, we have to, I realize it's very hard, but yeah, you're right. I shouldn't eat myself up, and I should just realize that this is it, and this is what we have to do our best.
Exactly.
Yes.
Rabbi,
okay.
Doctor, let me ask you a question we have in the Lakewood School, very similar to this one. It goes as follows. I've been following your show for a while, really enjoy the insights, the questions and answers, chachma, blah, blah, blah. Okay, Hashem should continue giving everyone siyata d'shmaya. Here's the question. She has a great marriage. She has several children. The oldest is 12. And Baruch Hashem, everything is doing well. The issue is that she's having a very difficult time with her mother. Since she got married, her parents, especially her mother, she grew up by basically all her physical needs. She had to take care of her mother. Oh, sorry, but her mother never gave her any emotional needs at all. She never heard her parents say, I love you. I'm quite responsible and independent and often ask for help and for advice. But she is always the giver, and it annoys her to no end that her mother or her parents are so needy now that they're getting older. And it's really hard for them to go beyond themselves of what they need. Generally, she's saying, I'm okay, and learn to set boundaries and not share too many details or fear of disappointment and of their selfishness attitude. Although they think they're doing tons for me, however, certain times that I am more sensitive, change of residence, or my husband lost his job, or a child is sick, I expect empathy, or at least just because I'm feeling that I want parents and they're never there. There is no emotional support system for me from my husband, but I need once in a while from my parents. What would you sort of say where it can happen sometimes where parents can be either the first generation Holocaust survivor, actual, or their parents, which are second generation Holocaust survivors, and they don't know how to give any emotional love, and this woman is saying she needs help.
Well, first of all, although it certainly is a factor in common finding in Holocaust survivors, but this can happen in people who are not Holocaust survivors, who are incapable of sharing or giving emotions or expressing gratitude. And incidentally, it's not only elderly people. This happens at all ages. I pointed out that sometimes you see a mother telling a 5-year-old child, say thank you to the nice man for the candy, and the child says, and a 5-year-old child can't say I thank you. I pointed out at one time, I'm sorry that I'm digressing a little bit, but some of the Sforim have asked, inasmuch as Hashem knows all of our thoughts, why do we have to daven verbally? Why do we have to pronounce the words? Right? Isn't it enough to think the thoughts? And there's all kinds of answers for that. I think that there's an advantage to verbalizing because there are 3 themes in davening that are emphasized. One is the love of Hashem, expressing our love for Hashem. 2, expressing our gratitude to Hashem. All right? And 3rd, to admit that we did wrong and asking for forgiveness. Right? So the 3 magic phrases are, I love you, I thank you, and I'm sorry that I was wrong. These are words that some people have difficulty saying. Right? Some people can't say, I'm sorry, I did wrong. And they have to insist that what they did was right. There's some people who can't get the words, I love you, out of their mouth. So I said, inasmuch as we have to pronounce the words in tefillah, right? And we say it to Hashem, if we become familiar with the words of talking it to Hashem and saying to Hashem, I love you, and I thank you, and I'm sorry, but I was wrong, it may be easier to say it to another person. But these are human foibles that happen even with non-Holocaust survivors, that they have a difficulty in expressing emotion. And it's unfortunate that children who have parents who who were unable to express emotions, missing that enormous point of life of having emotional empathy. But you can't change the parents, right? And so we have to get some help and get some psychotherapy in realizing that we should not let this affect us and think that we're undeserving of it, right? And that we have to look for emotional strength and satisfying our needs in other ways. We can have a great deal of emotional needs, gratification, if we develop a closer relation with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's a powerful source, emotional. Now, it's unfortunate you can't put your hands around Hashem. I understand that, right? But still, there are such things as getting support through religion. So it's important also to foster more emotions with family members, right? Even though our parents may not have been emotionally warm to us, we can be emotionally warm to our children, or with our siblings, or with our friends. And all of these are kind of things that can compensate for the deficiency. The deficiency existed there, and there's nothing that we can do about it. That was a fact of life. But the question is, the issue is how we can best compensate for that deficiency.
I would like for all our listeners to know, and I'm going to read this, a great appreciation. The woman that just spoke and called about that her father, her father's the Holocaust survivor, and she has a huge burden and it's difficult. So a social worker just called in the program and said as follows: I'm listening to this woman calling about her father, a Holocaust survivor. I'm a social worker for the JCC of Greater Coney Island, and we provide extensive services for survivors, home care, cleaning help, transportation, friendly visit services, and may help ease this woman's burden. So let me share with you the number of the social worker, and where you can call up if any of you have a Holocaust survivor, parent, and I wonder what other services they have. The JCC of Greater Coney Island, their number is 718, or the social worker's number is 718-449-5000. That's 718-449-5000, extension 2354, extension 2354. So again, that's the JCC of Greater Coney Island, and they're there. They have some programs that can help you if you've got a Holocaust surviving parent, and I wonder what other programs they have. That number to help out with some of the basic stuff, which is home care, cleaning help, transportation, friendly visiting services, that's 718-449-5000, extension 2354. Thank you for offering that services. That's wonderful. Let's go take another caller or two. We've got Devora on line. Aaron, you go ahead. Pick who would you like. We'll take Chana on line 3. Chana, you're on the air with Rabbi Dr. Twerski.
Hi. I just want to speak very short. Many years ago, somebody asked Rabbi Dr. Twerski for a referral for a young boy, and Rabbi Twerski sent him to a certain psychologist. He ended up getting wonderful, wonderful care and overcoming his emotional difficulties, and went on, Baruch Hashem, he's my husband. For many years I've wanted to say thank you to Rabbi Twerski, and when I heard he was on the air, I was very glad for the opportunity to call and say thank you. For my husband is a wonderful man, and Baruch Hashem, we have 5 children, and now my husband is helping his own siblings to overcome their difficulties and send them to the right people who can help them. So I wanted to say thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you, because that's very good for my self-esteem. I still need it.
Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Greatly appreciated. And for those of you that would like to watch us, besides for listening, you can see us live on the Lakewood Scoop, on YeshivaWorld.com, and of course on the JRootradio.com. So appreciating all that. Yes, let's go to line 6 to Paulette. You're on the air with Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twerski.
Yeah, hi. I have a 10-year-old brother. He has selective mutism. He's in a therapy. He's in a therapy right now. He started a few months ago. They put him on medication together with the therapy to take off the edge of the anxiety. First of all, the medication making him very wild, like acting, socially funny, silly. But the therapy is not working for him. It's like he thinks it's silly. They're making him repeat, basically what they're doing is they're trying to reinforce the fact that he's talking to whoever he's talking to. So let's say they'll bring my mother in and they'll say, oh, play like go, and then he'll talk to my mother, and my mother will say, oh, that's so nice you said that. And he can't. He's not stupid. He's like, would Ma stop it? Like, what are you doing while you're telling me to stop treating me this way? So basically, the question is, did he continue with this if it's not working?
All right, let me first say that whenever questions like this comes up, I have to qualify that I never treated children, and I cannot speak authoritatively about any childhood disease. However, in any condition, whatever age it is, if you find that whatever you're doing is not working, it's always wise to get a second opinion. So if your particular doctor may be, therapist may be very competent, but if it's not working, it's always good to have somebody get a fresh look, and maybe there are some suggestions that can be made. On this particular condition, I cannot respond at all because, as I said, it's a childhood condition and I never treated it.
I'll just give you one or two thoughts of opinions of what I have about this. First of all, for those of you that like to call in, we still have about another 10 minutes, just a little above that, to speak to, what a great opportunity to speak to Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twerski. And the number to call in is 718-683-5858. That's 718-683-5858. I've seen several times where people went to psychiatrists for children, and it's very clear also in the psychiatric department that adults or psychiatrists that are experienced with adults and children are very different worlds. And usually you will find that adult psychiatrists will not treat children. So I'm actually involved in a case right now where they went to an excellent adult psychiatrist, but the medication was off, and they went to a child psychiatrist, and within about 3 months things are really stabilizing. So if
He's
you're
in actually it's a child institute. It's for children, but they usually start with, let's say someone who has selective mu, they start at a younger age. He's been through a different therapy, which was not working for the past 3 years. So now he started with this one, but it's a little too. I think that their protocol, their system is he's a little too old for it. So do you go with it? Do you test it out a little more? He's only in it for 3 months, but by now they say he's supposed to be more, I guess, adjusted or whatever. He's behind. So it is for children, but maybe he's not. Right. He's old.
I'll just reiterate what Rabbi Dr. Twerski said, and that is it's always good to go for a second opinion. You never need to, if you're not happy with the treatments, then go ahead and just make sure, get a second opinion. It's in your rights. Many times when you go to the hospital, you see posted all over your patient's bill of rights, what rights you have, and the second opinion is always one of them, so feel free to do that. We're being asked
sorry, one more thing. About the medication, that it's driving him, he's on a very low dose. It's not the dose they want to get him at, and it's making him, in school, like wild or scream, do funny things. But what do you say about that?
Well, you have to report that to the doctor. Like I say, human beings are different. Something which works fine for one person may not be the right thing for the other. And the only way you know it is by taking it and finding out. So if there's what seems to be an improper reaction, report it to the doctor.
Oh.
All right. We got over here a question that I'm going to try to sort of clarify or kasher the question. And it's as follows. My son, who is 19, was in yeshiva until now. Unfortunately, he now has a relationship that he would like to marry a girl. He has no job. He is not mature to get involved in a serious relationship. Nonetheless, he is not listening to any one of the parents or to any of the Rabbeim or to any of the Gedolim, whoever we got to see. He even twists their words back to them. And any suggestions that you have?
Well, it's unfortunate that so often our children will not listen to us, and we have no control over them. In those situations, what you've got to make it clear to the child is, look, you're our child, we love you, but when you're doing something which is destructive, which we see as destructive, you've got to understand that we cannot be supportive of it. And this is whether it's drugs or alcohol or gambling or a love relationship which is improper. Unfortunately, he may not listen to you. And if he makes a foolish move and makes a marriage which is improper, we know very well what the consequences are going to be. That it's very likely that it would not last. But you have to realize that just like an addict is powerless over alcohol, that parents are very often powerless over their children. Right? Someone said, a child came back from Sunday school and had learned the story about Yahushua, who had the sun, made the sun stop in the sky in order to complete the battle. And the mother asked him what he learned, and he said, he heard that there was a miracle that Yeshua told the sun to stop doing something, and the sun listened.
Very nice. Very nice. Very nice. Okay, so you're saying that the mother needs to let go, the parents need to recognize that on certain levels they might be powerless or not have the power, and to sort of set us whatever limits and boundaries that are healthy and to be there for.
Right.
All right, we're going to go to line 1 to Grace. I'm not sure who. You're on line 1. Hello?
Hello?
Yes, what's your name?
Grace.
Grace, I got you. Wonderful. Grace, you're on with our wonderful esteemed Rabbi Doctor.
Hello, thank you for answering me, letting me talk. I have a question regarding when children have, like, they get angry and then they have violent outbursts where they'll throw chairs, furniture, or break things. How to help them, not to control it in the heat of the moment, but how to teach them that there's other ways to deal with their anger.
So the question is that she knows some children that when they're angry, they get violent. They can throw chairs, break stuff. How do you teach them? How do you educate them not to do that at the calm times?
Well, I'm going to back off on that one because, again, it's a child problem. And I think you need to consult a child specialist, therapist, with what you do for violent behavior. Clearly, you cannot allow violent behavior to continue. But I'm at a loss to be able to answer that because I'm not a child psychologist.
Generally, I would take some of that question, but honestly, today I find it such an honor that we have over here Rabbi Dr. Twerski that we're going to go take over here some more questions where we'll have the Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twerski take, with some siyata d'shmaya, take. For those of you listening in now, we've got about 5 minutes left, but just for you to know, it's Mordechai Weinberger having our weekly program of Let's Grow Together. We have a wonderful honor of having Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twerski come to the studio. You can watch us live or see the recording on the Yeshiva World, on Lakewood Scoop, and of course on the J-Root Radio. And it was really a schus to have him come down. Just called him up and asked, are you willing to do it? And it was a very simple yes. So for those of you listening, it's a wonderful schus and an honor that he has volunteered just to come down like this. Rivka on line 2, you're on the air with Rabbi Dr. Twerski.
Hi, good afternoon. I want to thank you very much for your program. I really enjoy it, and thank you very much, Dr. Twerski. Your son, Rabbi Ben Sion Twerski, has helped me so much at his mass meetings. He was really amazing. Yes. Always. I'm a young woman with very severe arthritis in my wrists, and I do things differently. I struggle a lot with simple things, opening knobs and cans, and my mother-in-law joins me every Shabbos for a meal. And whenever I struggle with something or I open something in the non-conventional way, she'll stare at me and she'll comment, and I feel very bad about myself. In general, I try to avoid people who bring attention to my handicaps and make me feel bad about myself, and I can't avoid her because she's my mother-in-law. But I would like to work out my feelings so that I don't feel so bad about myself when I hear these comments.
You know, it's very difficult when you've got any kind of physical handicap. Of course, it's a difficulty in dealing with it. But for no reason that I can surmise should one feel bad about oneself. You're suffering, you're hurt, right? I understand that. I am, for the past several years, I am a sufferer of spinal stenosis with severe back pain. I don't like the back pain. I'm looking for ways to get over it, but it has not made me feel bad about myself. There's just no rationale in feeling bad about yourself. Now, the fact that your mother-in-law or anyone else is going to look at you and some kind of critical facts because you have difficulty in opening a jar or something else like that. I say that's her problem. That's not your problem. That's her problem, and it's unfortunate that she doesn't have the good judgment to know better than to be in any way critical or insulting about your difficulty. So that's her problem, not yours. Don't feel bad about yourself. I'm a strong believer in mind-body relationships, and I think feeling bad about oneself just makes a bad condition worse. So you can feel, it's all right to feel sorry for yourself. That's legitimate, right? But just don't feel bad about yourself.
Does that answer your question? Okay, yes. We've got 3 minutes left to go. We will take one more quick question, and we will take... Who's there? We'll take Devora. Devora on line 3. You're on here with Rabbi Doctor. This will probably be the last question of the day. Well, hello? Yes?
Hello?
Yes, there's just a lot of feedback going on.
I'm sorry. I wanted to know what we have to do around people, let's say, a job that they have like negative energy on you, and they make always like is not done, the job is not done correctly, or even if you do your best and the job is done well, and you try to help them in other stuff, and they still not appreciate it. So, like, they have a negative energy about they give you.
Okay. So the basic question is, how do you deal with people that are negative, that are critical, that whatever you do, even if you do a good job, they're still angry at you, they still find negative? And we've got about a minute and a half to answer that.
Yeah, of course, as I said to this woman before, that's their problem, not yours. For some reason or other, they cannot tolerate another person's success because perhaps it makes them feel unworthy about themselves. You know, my father, when people used to say about a person, oh, yes, as a schlechter Yid, and he's such a bad Jew, and my father said, no, so nicht a schlechter Yid. There's no such thing. A narrish Yid, he's foolish. He doesn't realize that what he's doing is foolish. People who look at you negatively, that's their problem, and it's their foolishness. So what can you do if somebody's foolish? You can't give him a new seichel.
And basically what you're saying is that if we can realize it's their issue, not ours, then their words won't affect us. So it's sort of like creating a shield around ourselves.
Right.
Okay. So for those of you, I'd like to thank you, Rabbi, Dr. Twerski, for coming in from your far drive in the snow, coming in for us. And congratulations on your latest book, number 70 plus, on the Rabbi and the nuns, which will be a great, should have a great success. As well as you've said, you've just come out with a sefer on the Mishnah, all the lessons that we learned from Mishnah. What is it called? So our listeners...
Messages from the Mishnah.
Messages from the Mishnah, how we can learn to grow from within ourselves to do things better. And for those of you, I'd like to thank you all for calling in, for asking, and looking forward to having you, Meretz Hashem, next week, Tuesday, our regular program from 12 to 2 p.m. So thank you again for coming in. And Hatzlacha.